The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, welcome to this year's Consolidated Funding Application Bidders Conference. We'll be getting started in about 3 to 4 minutes. All right, thank you. All right. Thank you all for participating in this year's Consolidated Funding Application, the CFA City Fiscal Year 2022 Bidders Conference. We're just going to get started. So just a quick overview for today's agenda. We'll be going over the CFA, eligibility projects, some more detail about the specific HOPWA and State Special Fund SSF program for individuals living with HIV and AIDS. And we'll do a review of the review process and the selection process and have a short Q&A. I want to thank my fellow colleagues at MOHS for presenting today. So just a quick introduction, Katie Yorick, Chief of Policy and Partnership, Paris Wilson, Program Compliance Officer, Alikisha Vaughn, Program Compliance Supervisor, and myself, Paroma Nandi. So just a quick, some housekeeping for today's presentation. This webinar is being recorded. And will be posted along with the slides to the MOHS website. All attendees today are muted to prevent background noise. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar, so you can submit it, I believe, using the question box to the right. And then all questions will be posted to an FAQ to the website as well later or next week. And again, if you have specific questions that are about your project specifically and not about the competition process or the application process, you can direct specific questions to the mohs.hsp.application@baltimorecity.gov inbox. So an overview of the CFA. So the CFA stands for the Consolidated Funding Application. It's comprised of 5 different funding sources. So of that, it's the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Emergency Solutions Grant, the State of Maryland Homelessness Solutions Program, the Department of Social Services grant, and then the HUD Program for Housing Opportunities Persons with AIDS and HIV, which is HOPWA, and the Maryland Department of Health State Special Funds, which we call SSF. Of those 5 grants, it comes to about approximately $5 million that we have to allocate to agencies. The CFA is open to agencies and organizations that provide services to individuals and families who are experiencing homelessness and are at risk of being homeless in Baltimore City, and it also includes, individuals living with HIV and AIDS. And again, Lakeisha will be going over that in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. This is the FY 2022 City Fiscal Year CFA. So any agency that is awarded grant funds for this project under this RFP will be, their projects will start July 1st, 2021 and go until June 30th, 2022. Project grants for the CFA typically fall between $25,000 all the way up to $150,000. Last year, the median grant award was $130,000. Okay. So CFA funding priorities have not changed from previous years. The programs and activities that align with MOHS and the COC continuum of care goals. So again, it's to reduce the length of time people experience homelessness in time in shelter, transitional housing, and on the street. Increase clients' exits to permanent housing, and then reduce returns to homelessness. These goals align with MOHS's mission, again, to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring in Baltimore City, and also align with the COC priorities. Right here, we have the Baltimore Continuum of Care organizational chart that shows the stakeholders involved, the Continuum of Care Board, the executive committee, action committees of the COC, capacity building committees, and then communities of practice. If you are a new agency that is not a member of the COC, we highly recommend that you join It's free membership, and you can complete the membership form on the Journey Home website. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. Since we are still meeting primarily virtually, we have not had any in-person meetings. All information is being really shared through our newsletter. So it's important, again, if you are not a member, to make sure you complete the membership form, and also separately sign up for the Journey Home newsletter. Again, all important information about MOHS activities and the COC are being shared through the newsletter. So again, one of the goals of the CFA project, and is outlined in the application process, is to make sure your project proposals align with the 5 key strategies of the Journey Home, part of our action plan. So increasing the supply of affordable housing, creating a more effective homeless response system, transforming the shelter system, improving access to employment and economic opportunities, and establishing a race equity agenda. And so again, projects should align with these key strategies in their project design and implementation. We've listed some examples how projects can do this on this slide. And again, these should be expanded in your project application. There should be a focus on exits to permanent housing, the use of coordinated access, setting up your project budgets to include navigation services at shelters and drop-in centers. They should be listed at access points to offer navigation to clients. Outreach projects should be engaging clients to referring clients to navigating sites and through partnerships. Rapid rehousing projects should be working with navigators. There's other ways to participate through the COC by attending some of the action committees and other case conferencing opportunities. Projects should be focused on supporting clients in workforce development and should list out any formal and informal partnerships. And then there should be a focus on analyzing individual project outcomes and data to address any racial equity at your agency. So again, there's some examples listed on this slide, but in your application, it's going to be really important that you ensure that you are designing your project or ensuring that your renewal project is aligned with the action plan to ensure that you continue to receive funding. And then I will pass it to Katie Yorick, Chief of Policy and Partnership, to go over the eligibility for the CFA.
Thanks, Brahma. Next slide, please. All right, so in order to apply for CFA funding, all organizations have to meet some minimum eligibility requirements. First and foremost, you must be a nonprofit, 501c3, or another city agency. You also must be in good standing with the state of Maryland, and note that that certification of good standing can be obtained through the state's Department of Taxation website, and it must be current, so within 30 days of the submission of your application. We have the link at the resources at the end if you're not sure how to order the certificate, but please know that you'll need to include it as part of your application packet. Next, you'll have to submit your most recent single audit or an independent financial audit for your organization. This is just so we can ensure that organizations are really in a good financial health as part of our responsibility for fiscal stewardship. And lastly, you will need to either be a continuum of care member agency if you're applying as a renewal project, or be willing to become a continuum of care member if you receive funds as part of this process. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, applications will be reviewed to really assess the financial health of an organization and overall compliance, especially for our renewal projects. So we'll be reviewing audits and your prepared financial statements to review for any findings or material weaknesses in the overall fiscal management, review for your organization's cash flow, and look at other sources of funding and support for ongoing operations, and then review your access to lines of credit. Note that all contracts with the city are on a reimbursement basis, and so it's really important to have that access to credit in order to begin project operations. For renewal projects, we will also be examining the de-obligation of funds, as well as keeping an eye to timely invoicing in the past and sort of the accuracy of overall invoices submitted, as well as looking at any monitoring findings as a result of past monitorings done by MOHS. Next slide. The city also has some mandatory minimum insurance coverage requirements. So if you're applying, you'll need to currently carry or be willing to obtain certain insurance coverage. Namely, this is professional liability errors and emission insurance with a minimum of $3 million in coverage, coverage for workers' compensation, general commercial liability insurance, so a minimum of $3 million policy, business automobile liability insurance for a minimum of $1 million coverage, fidelity insurance in the case of any employee fraud, and then cyber liability insurance, a minimum of $1 million policy coverage. And this is especially important because so much of the city's data is stored electronically, especially in our HMIS system. And so should there be a breach, we require that organizations have that liability coverage, and really just in case something happens. Please note the agencies are required to have this coverage and submit proof of it prior to receiving a final contract with the city. Next slide. Another thing all organizations applying for CFA funding will have to agree to do is align their program policy with what we call Housing First. Housing First is I could say it's more of an attitude than anything. Primarily, it's the belief that homelessness is first and foremost a housing problem and should be treated as such. Right? There are many causes to homelessness and one solution, and that's housing. If you're signing up for Housing First, it's really with the understanding that housing is a right to which everyone is entitled. Issues that may have contributed to a household's homelessness can really be best addressed once they're housed. So this is meant to ensure that programs in general are low barrier, meaning that you're not screening folks out based on certain conditions or income, really with the understanding that all of that can be addressed after somebody has been placed in housing. So people who are homeless or on the verge of homelessness should be returned to or stabilized in permanent housing as quickly as possible without the preconditions of treatment, acceptance, or compliance for issues such as mental health and substance abuse. This is meaning that you cannot actively screen out a program participant for a substance use disorder. Lastly, service providers working with an individual should connect clients to robust resources necessary to sustain that housing permanency. And really with the understanding that participation is achieved through assertive engagement and motivation and not coercion of clients. So again, as part of this Housing First commitment, programs must focus on quickly moving residents into permanent housing options. Programs can't screen out clients for having too little or no income, an active or a history of substance use, having criminal record findings, or a history of domestic violence. Along those lines, programs also may not terminate clients for failing to participate in supportive services. As we mentioned, they are suggested, they are helpful, they are not mandatory. You also may not terminate clients for failure to make progress on an individual service plan, for a loss of income or a failure to improve income, or for being a victim of domestic violence. Also, all of our providers must agree to abide by fair housing law. The Federal Fair Housing Act of 1968 really ensures equal access across the board to housing without regard to someone's race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, or disability. In addition to this federal regulation, the City of Baltimore also has legislation around protected class status, meaning that housing must be provided to program participants regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, sex or gender, marital status, physical or mental disabilities, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. While we do welcome faith-based service providers to apply for funding, there are some regulations in place through our funding streams around the provision of services in a religious context, namely that all faith-based organizations must agree to the following tenets. and that they will not discriminate against any employee or applicant for employment on the basis of religion, and will not limit employment or give preference in employment on the basis of religion. Next, the organization must agree not to discriminate against, limit services provided to, or give preference to any person obtaining shelter, other services provided by the project, or any eligible activity permissible under CFA programs on the basis of religion, and that they will not limit such service provision or give preference to persons on the basis of religion. On a more functional note, this means that organizations must not require clients to participate in religious instruction, counseling, religious services, worship, excluding voluntary non-denominational prayer before a meeting, or engage in religious proselytizing or exert any other religious influences in the provision of shelter or other activities.
Cool. Well, hello everyone. My name is Paris Wilson, and I am here to talk to you all regarding your projects. And just to level set, projects and programs are pretty much, I'm using them interchangeably. So if I use project or program, they mean the same thing. So with this slide, with coordinated access is the process for housing and homelessness services, like case management, just for a prime example. But projects that fall under drop-in centers, shelters, transitional housing, or street outreach must participate in Baltimore's coordinated access system. So those individuals can serve as navigators. And once the grants are awarded to your particular program or project, your programs will be monitored for its performance and participation by MOHS. However, if your agency is currently not offering navigation through coordinated access, then please reach out to our coordinated access team to learn more. And that information can be found on the MOHS, Mayor's Office of Homeless Services website under HMIS, which we'll be talking about in a couple slides. Next slide, please. Why use coordinated access? So note that in 2012, HUD, Housing and Urban Development, mandated communities to develop and operate a coordinated access system to create a rapid, effective, and consistent way to match clients to housing. Coordinated access streamlines access to housing and services rather than having to apply separately to each program, as you see in the diagram here. The vision of the coordinated access system is to ensure that individuals and families who are at risk are experiencing homelessness will have an equitable and centralized process for timely access to appropriate services in a person-centered approach that preserves choice and dignity. But prior to coordinated access, navigators, and your navigators can be your case managers or any individual who connects to the client directly, will connect the client to coordinated access, and then that person or persons will be matched either through, let's say, for a program of rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. In addition, navigators will connect households to other support services. They may also resolve their homelessness. But long story short, coordinated access is a centralized process for assessing persons in need of homelessness services to determine the appropriate service type and housing option. And again, if you have any questions about this process, please reach out to us at MOHS. And then also the coordinated access policies and procedures can be found on the MOHS website as well. Next slide, please. All right, really briefly, like I stated before, coordinated entry participation any activity under coordinated access, especially coordinated entry, will be monitored by MOHS. The qualities of the process I want to highlight, which are the prioritization. The coordinated access is person-centered, is fair and equal. The individual has fair and equal access, and then it's also inclusive. And lastly, we rolled out a shelter hotline last year, October 2020, and that information can be found on the website as well. Next slide, please. All right, HMIS. So I brought up HMIS in the previous slide, but HMIS stands for the Homeless Management Information System. And this is something, and this is, and MOHS is the designated lead agency that manages HMIS for all of the projects. And we do this through a database called ClientTrack that abides with federal regulations. And lastly, all grantees must enter client data into HMIS within 24 hours or 1 business day of client interaction. And this training will be provided by the MOHS HMIS team. And again, if you have any more questions, just please reach out to us and we'll be able to help you. And we can find more information about this on our website. Next slide. All right, projects. So to ensure that you are receiving a grant or a grant award, please make sure that you have the eligible activities for at least 1 grant source. And this is very important. So if you are proposing two distinct types of services, or we have an example here, example street outreach or shelter, you must submit 2 applications for each. We're going to highlight and bold that. Just make sure that you all, again, submit 2 different applications for 2 distinct types of services for the population you're trying to serve. Next slide. So there are, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 projects that you all are eligible for. Right now, it's going to give you an overview of the eligible projects that you can apply for. So there's referee housing, short street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, housing and services for people living with AIDS and HIV. That's a HOPWA program. And PCH is a permanent supporting housing and transitional housing. But however, please note that for PCH, that's the permanent supportive housing and transitional housing, are only for renewal applications only due to some restrictions through the state of Maryland. Next slide. All right, so when determining homelessness status eligibility by the Housing and Urban Development's definition, there are actually 4 categories, but for this CFA, we're only utilizing 3 of the categories. So with category 1, which is literally homeless, there the individual or family with a primary nighttime residence that is public or private, places that is not meant for human habitation, is category 1. For category 2, an individual or a family member or family who imminently lose their primary residence, nighttime residence, provided that the residence will be lost within 14 days of the date of application for homeless assistance. So this is category 2, a person or persons who are in imminent risk of homelessness. And then category 4, self-explanatory, but any individual who is at risk or who is fleeing or attempting to flee from domestic violence. And clients must meet the following categories to be eligible for services under emergency shelter, street outreach, referee housing, or permanent supportive housing. And as a part of coordinated access, documentation is required to ensure participants are eligible for these services. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it along to Lakeisha Vaughn, who's the Program Compliance Officer for MOHS, who will be discussing HOPWA and SSF.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Paris, for passing it over to me. So as Paris stated, I'm Lakeisha Vaughn. I'm the HOPWA Program Compliance Supervisor, and the funding priorities under HOPWA are projects and activities that are in alignment with MOHS's plans and goals and strategies. And specifically, Goal 3, reduce returns to homelessness. And we prioritize Goal 3 for 2 specific reasons. One is because we know that housing for people living with HIV is healthcare. And the second reason is because people living with HIV have better health outcomes when they are stably housed, because they can focus more on treatment Therefore, housing for persons living with HIV is paramount. And strategy 4, improve access to employment and economic opportunities. So because there have been a number of medical advancements for people living with HIV, we know that they are living longer and healthier lives. And there is data to show that people living with HIV that are employed, they actually have better health outcomes and they are more stable. So the Office of HIV and AIDS has prioritized employment opportunities and economic development for people living with HIV. All projects must also be in alignment with the HIV National AIDS Strategy. And we have provided the link to that also in the resources. Next slide, please. The Maryland State Special Fund. So MOHS receives a funding award from the Department of Health, the Maryland Department of Health, in partnership with the Baltimore City Health Department. Though these funds are not Ryan White funds, they are actually guided by the Ryan White Part B regulations. Therefore, they're eligible for persons that are of low income and living with HIV. These funded services must also be inconsistent in alignment with the National HIV and AIDS Strategy. Goal 1, which is to prevent new HIV infections. So that would be increasing awareness, increased knowledge of HIV status, and improved capacity for healthcare deliveries. Goal 2, improving HIV health-related outcomes for people with HIV. So this could be linking people to care immediately after they're diagnosed and providing low barrier access to treatment, identifying and engaging and re-engaging people that are not in care, increased capacity of healthcare delivery system, public health, and workforce to serve people with HIV. Goal 3, reduce HIV disparities and health inequities. So we want to reduce HIV-related stigma and discrimination, reduce disparities in new HIV infections to ensure that people living with HIV know their status and where they are along the HIV care continuum. And then goal 4, achieve an integrated, coordinated effort that addresses the HIV epidemic along with partners and stakeholders. So we want to increase coordination of HIV programs across all levels of government, as well as enhance the quality, accessibility, sharing of data. Now, under this State Special Fund Award, project sponsors are required to enter data into CareAware, which is the Ryan White data system. All services are reported there. HOPWA does not particularly have a database where information is required to be captured. However, for our internal HOPWA program, we do utilize coordinated access to place people into housing. We are expecting a decrease in the State Special Fund Award this year. We will know more about that in late spring. And for the HOPWA projects, you will complete one application and then we'll determine what funding source your project is best suited for. Thank you. And I'm going to pass it back over to Paroma.
Thanks, Lakeisha. And so I'll be just quickly going over the review process and the selection process for the CFA this year. So what's new this year? Obviously, the funding amounts will change a little bit, but as Lakeisha mentioned, for the HOPWA and SSF funds, we won't know the exact amount until late spring, and that goes to the ESG and HSP funds as well. We won't know the exact amounts that the city will be receiving until probably late spring. However, we expect there to be fairly level funding in that. The project applications and project budgets have changed a little bit this year, so make sure you take a look at those as early as possible as you're filling out the applications. We will be answering questions specific to the project applications or budget templates between now and the due date. So again, it's important to take a look at those as they have changed from previous years. The review and selection process for the CFA is basically 3 steps. So first is, getting the application in on time and completing the application. Again, it's really important that the application is submitted to our inbox before 4 p.m. And that each question is answered. The application does have some specific questions for specific project types. So again, make sure you're reading the application carefully to make sure you're filling out the required sections. The second piece of the review process is eligibility review. So there is a quick threshold review to make sure that your agency is eligible to receive the CFA, receive funding through the CFA, that you have the basic documentation that Katie went over earlier in this presentation. There's a checklist as well on the application. So make sure when you're submitting the application to go through that checklist. And that the project, and this is really important as well, that your project clearly defines an eligible activity that Paris went over. So again, there are a few projects like transitional housing and PSH that are we are only accepting renewals for. So if you are applying for a new project, make sure that you meet the eligibility criteria. And then again, there's a financial health risk assessment to ensure that your agency is able to accept the funds and, if given a grant award, able to disseminate them within that year. And then step 3 is the actual project scoring. So there is an independent review panel that's made up of staff from the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, individuals from our Lived Experience Advisory Committee of the COC, a member of our Youth Action Board, and other stakeholders from our COC. So again, there is a independent review process for the actual project, review of the project, that then we score the applications based on these 2 different categories. Again, we're really looking again at the need and project scope, the approach, the organizational capacity and performance, an agency's ability to collaborate across the board, and then the overall quality of the proposal. And then in category 2, all of the above is included in that review process. But again, these are for renewal projects. So additionally, these projects, we are looking at project compliance. And so ensuring that those projects have had positive monitoring reviews, that they are submitting their expense reports on time, that there isn't any major issue that has come up through the monitoring reports, and then also looking at performance outcomes from past years. So just to quickly go over the system performance metrics, they have also not changed from previous years. You'll see this chart is also listed in the RFP. And again, we're looking at performance metrics based off the project type. So if you see a check mark on that performance metric, that is something that we are looking at. To date, we are working on defining these benchmarks. So projects that are awarded this year for the CFA should expect that when we do go into contracting, that there are specific benchmarks outlined in the contracts. And again, that will be discussed in detail to any project that's awarded funding through the CFA. Just also an important note that any new projects that that are applying for the CFA, they should be considering their proposal as new programming. And since typically we cannot support existing projects for supplemental funding. So again, new projects that are applying for the CFA should really indicate that this is a new project, a new proposal that meets the criteria and eligibility for the grant sources. And then due to the number of applications we receive each year and the funding constraints through the CFA, it is important to note that not all new projects that pass our threshold and meet maybe the minimum scores will be awarded just because of the restrictions with funding and limitations we have. So a quick overview of the timeline. Again, the CFA was released last Friday, February 19th. The application deadline is Friday, March 26th. Again, we are only accepting electronic submissions. All materials must be submitted to the MOHS inbox. The email is listed here and is on the RFP as well. And the deadline is 4 p.m. So again, it is important that all applications are submitted timely. Conditional awards will be sent out in May. If you are not awarded, you will also be sent out a notification about that. And then as I mentioned earlier, the FY22 CFA, all contracts begin July 1st, 2021 and end June 30th, 2022. Submission requirements. So again, as I mentioned, important to submit all of the files to the inbox listed here. We do request that you have that you use this naming convention if possible. It does help us sort through all of the applications and to ensure that your documentation for your application does not get lost. So again, for your actual application, we ask that you save it as a PDF with your agency, the project name, and then CFA 22 application. The project budget should be saved in Excel, again, with your agency name, the project name, and then the CFA 22 budget. And then all required supporting documents should be submitted, again, using the naming convention listed there. Again, you can scan all documents together or separately, but it does help as long as you use this naming convention so we know that like this document goes with this agency. Again, sometimes the entire application can be large, so you can submit it using a zip file or send it in multiple emails. Just let us know that when you're sending it in the MOHS in the subject line or in the narrative of the email that it's coming in multiple emails, so we know that it's a complete application. Budget templates are listed on the website. It's important that the proposal matches the budget template that you are applying for, since there are different line items that are eligible for each project type. So again, if you are applying for emergency shelter, you should use the emergency shelter and transitional housing budget template. If you're applying for rapid rehousing, use the budget template. If you have specific questions about this or any of the line items, feel free to ask a question today or submit it to our inbox. As somebody mentioned earlier, here's a list of different resources that might help with developing your project proposal. There's obviously a lot of information on our website and on the Baltimore City's Journey Home website. But you can also go to some of our, federal partners and other stakeholders. So HUD has additional information specifically about the Emergency Solutions Grant or HOPWA. The National Alliance to End Homelessness has great information about policies and Housing First initiatives. Again, you can use all of these resources here to help develop your proposal. Also, the Maryland State Department of Assessment and Taxation website is here, and that is listed here so that you can apply and get your certificate from the state of Maryland for good standing as a requirement for the application. Okay, so I'm going to pause the presentation. We can have a short Q&A. I don't see any questions as of yet in our inbox, so we'll keep the presentation open for the next 5 minutes to allow for questions. And if we don't get any today, again, we will be reviewing our inbox daily. So if there are questions, we will be posting them to the website as they come in. Again, thank you for your time today, and thank you to all of the presenters today as well. All right, we'll leave it for another minute to see if any questions come in. But if not, want to thank you for your time today. Again, the recording will be posted along with the slides to the website later today or early tomorrow. And if there are any other questions, feel free to send it directly to our inbox. And again, those will be posted in an FAQ as they come in to our website as well.